First of all, I started with the Rebel Base Builds templates for the bench, and I adjusted it for my bench, the size that I wanted. I traced them out and cut out all the pieces. So then I stacked them all together so I can use the planer and the sander and level them out and make them all the same size. And then I started assembling. And afterwards, using foam core, I marked the seating and then cut it out in a whole piece. I kept on adding supports, like putting the plate on the top so then later on I could put supports for the back. The supports, after stapling them, I put some screws in to make them stronger. And then started put on the backing. I even used some cardboard and some paper so I can make a template so it can fit exact. Then afterwards, whatever was left on the top extra, I use a router to level that out. With more foam core, I made the top part that goes against the wall and cut it out. And then installed it on the wall. These walls are very hard because it's solid concrete. So using the templates from Rebel Base Build, I cut out the back portion of the pads, stuck them onto the wood so I can use some acrylic paint and use them as a stencil to mark where these pieces are going to go. I also used some flexible wood to put the bottom part of the curve. The center pieces, they're all individually different, and try to do the bottom part. This was the hardest part for me. So I used the paper method, tape them together, and it was much easier to mark out all the pieces that I needed. These panels here, they were given to me by a friend, co-worker, and they had foam, wood, and some fabric that I might be able to use later on. So I took out all the staples and used this foam to make the pads from the back of my bench. So using some Super 77 glue, I used this to stick all the pads to the back, remembering always safety first, use a respirator. This took me a couple of days, but little by little, I completed it. So guys, I just gotta interfere here for a moment and let you know I am not an upholsterer. I'm sure I've said that a couple of times on the video. I have never upholstered like something big like this before. I saw some YouTube videos and I thought I can handle it, but you will see me make a couple of mistakes and maybe do something the hard way. Why I wanted to make this upholstered, I don't know. I just wanted to do something different and maybe challenge myself to see if I could do it. Well, you guys will be the judge of how well I did. So maybe it's not the correct way to do it, but this is how I did it. And maybe that's the new name of the channel. I don't know. This is not the correct way to do it, but this is how I did it. So let's continue. Mistake number one, I used this polyfill and I stapled it completely on the back of the bench. You'll see how I fixed this later on. And I also did the same with the fabric. This was a big mistake. I was thinking that I could staple in between the foam pieces and it would take the shape, but it didn't. I ended up cutting out the strips of the polyfill and then cutting individual pieces for each foam pad and staple them in individually and then cut off the excess. And now for the bottom portion, since I used the templates, I just marked them put the number on them, and then cut them individually. And did the same as I did on the top. Put all the pieces individually onto the bench. There was a portion of the back of the bench that I could see the wood, so I just cut out strips and stapled them in so I can cover all that up. So with the bench, I would say 90% done. All I needed to do was staple the bottom part and cut out a plate to cover all those edges. The top part, I also put strips, stapled them in so we can cover all that wood. The problem now is that I had a lot of exposed staples. So with EVA foam, I cut strips out, and these were glued in between all the pads to cover up as much as I could of the staples. So using the templates from the Rebel Base build, I also cut out these sides out of PVC panel and attached them with pocket screws. Now it's time for the bench greeblies. I cut out a piece of PVC panel, and then after picking out some greeblies, I just stuck them on there with CA glue. I had already pre-cut a frame for the greebly and just checked out how it looked. So now let's make more. First, let's cut out all the frames for the greeblies. That's what it looked like before, and now this is what it looks like cut. So we mark them and cut them all out. To get rid of the rough edges, I just sand them down. And now it's time to mold. After making a box out of PVC, I mixed the silicone as per the directions and poured the silicone to make a mold. After we demold the silicone, then we demold and pull out the greebly. And using Smooth Cast 300, we mix accordingly to the directions and pour it into the mold and make all our greeblies. We clean them out a bit, sand the edges, get them ready for paint. I put down a base coat of black to get it ready to paint. And the covers, I also painted with some black and a little bit of silver. I lost some of the footage here, but I used different shades of silver to paint the greeblies and also a silver paint pen. And to install them, I put some Gorilla Hot Glue and used some nails and hammered them in just to hold them. And now for more details, I put some more PVC panel, glue them in with some Gorilla Hot Glue. This is really strong stuff. And after it's all glued in, I secured them with some screws. Where the two PVC pieces meet, since it wasn't long enough, I used some hot glue to make it look like soldering points. Yes, I know I have Phillips screws, but that won't be seen after aging. And using the airbrush, I used some brown and start aging all the strips in between all of the pads and also a little bit the pads on the sides. Did multiple passes because the fabric kept on absorbing all of the paint. And I also used the airbrush to age a bit the side panels after they were painted gray. And now, let's see what it looks like. This time we're going to do the box panels that go on top of the bench. I'm using different materials to do this, so let's see how I did it. So I cut out a wood base of the form of the back of the bench and then started to cut out the boxes out of EVA foam. I'm using the templates from the Rebel base build to just have a basic idea of the size of the boxes. When using EVA foam, remember to always sharpen your knife between a couple of cuts. So I cut out also the top, remembering since this has a texture to always Dremel out the edge so it could stick better with the contact cement. And then continue to glue with contact cement to make the boxes. So now using some PVC panels, I cut out the fronts of these bench panels. And I also glue it on with some contact cement. Test the fitting out to see how they look and how they fit, and when they are fitted correctly, I start sanding all the edges and all the pieces, preparing them for paint. I use Plasti-Dip for the EVA foam parts. And I use some regular spray paint for the fronts. I start gluing on some details like the edge of the panels with some EVA strips that I cut out. And then start installing the greeblies. I have a basic idea of what I want, using some of the templates from the Rebel base build, and also adding some of my own little touches. I 3D printed some grates and just put in some old odd pieces of greeblies and stuff that I had hanging around. I didn't have blue LED lights, so I just took a couple of LEDs and just spray painted them. Now for the acrylic squares, I pulled this piece out of acrylic from a TV and just started cutting them in strips one by one. I wanted some to be blue and others to be white, so I just glued a couple of them on a piece of paper and then sprayed them blue. Then I went into Tinkercad and designed this little box so I can glue them on the back of each piece so I can then install a LED. I glue them together with a skewer and some CA glue. And they fit in the hole perfectly. More greeblies, cannot have enough greeblies. And now comes the lighting. So since it's EVA foam, I cut open some doors in the back so I can just access the front of the panels and install all the lights. Some of them I use some Gorilla Tape to hold them in, and others I use some hot glue. Testing the lights every time I install to make sure that every connection is working. Then I use some heat shrink to protect all the connections. Then comes the pinstriping. Put some rub and buff on the edges to make it look like a little bit of a scraped or chipped paint. And then comes the weathering. And now let's see how these panel boxes look on my Millennium Falcon inspired bench. And today we're going to continue with the what? Okay. And there we have the Millennium Falcon inspired bench box what panels.